All right, so just giving my thoughts on Anthony Joshua versus Joseph Parker. Joshua got a unanimous decision over Parker to unify his WBA and IBF belts that he brought to the table with the WBO belt that Parker brought to the table. So, it was a fight that definitely had a lot at stake. That said, it wasn't necessarily an exciting fight or an entertaining fight necessarily. It was an interesting fight from a I guess from a technical perspective, but even then, not necessarily so much considering just the fact that it seemed like early on Parker was giving Joshua a lot of trouble with his movement. Um, Joshua wasn't really throwing all that much. He had a few shots here and there, but it seemed like he was he was kind of loading up to kind of set up one particular shot. Like it wasn't so much like okay, he was gonna hit him with two, three, four shots, and then boom, he's gonna land that huge shot. It was almost like he was just looking to land that one big shot, and everything else was, more so fluff as opposed to the shots in the in between, but before that big bomb that he was looking for pretty much the whole night. They weren't necessarily anything that scored especially heavily. In the early rounds, I actually thought that Parker had the advantage. I thought that he was kind of dictating the pace of the fight. He was giving Joshua a lot of different angles that Joshua wasn't particularly comfortable with. He was missing pretty wide. And I thought that Joshua was getting pretty frustrated all the way up until, at the very least, into the middle rounds, where Joshua started to up the output a bit more. Was getting a little bit a little bit testy in there though too. He was definitely trying to throw like these kind of home run uppercuts on the inside, especially when the ref was breaking them. And the ref, like, don't even get me started on the ref. The ref was just way too involved in the fight, and he definitely ruined some of the better action that happened in the fight. By and large, it seemed like he was kind of protective of Joshua because it seemed like when Parker would start to have some success, the ref would really jump in. But at the same time, though, that would have been the instances where Joshua theoretically could have potentially made some big counter shots work for him, and just at the very least from a fan's perspective, would have given us more action to really see what both fighters had. As it was, it seemed like they were kind of allowed each of them to kind of fight at a certain pace, but it never quite popped off into that kind of explosive action that we, for instance, saw with Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz, where the first few rounds were kind of, kind of very, very tense, but neither one of them really wanted to show very much, and they were both kind of one shot at a time, and then it kind of led to little spurts of exchanges where there was kind of explosiveness happening. The potential explosiveness that could have happened in this fight, I think, was largely dissuaded by the damn referee getting involved every single time it looked like something might pop off. But Joshua did start to up the output a bit more so in the middle rounds, and especially so in the late rounds. And as the rounds kind of told on, it seemed like Parker's output started to decline, and ultimately, really, that's what got Joshua the victory, as far as I'm concerned. When I was watching it live, which wasn't the best ability for me to watch it. It wasn't the clearest wasn't the clearest of picture that I had in order to watch it. I did think that Parker was winning the fight, and ultimately I thought that he won the fight when I was watching it live. When I got a chance to rewatch it in much better clarity and on a much better screen as well. I could see where Joshua could get the victory. Although even when I was scoring it live, I didn't necessarily think that Parker got robbed or anything like that. I just think that the scoring margins from the official judges was way too wide. To me, this was kind of a 7-5 Joshua type of a fight, or a 6-6 type of fight. Really, it was very much a stalemate between the two of them. Parker was able to kind of negate a lot of the things that Joshua did. He landed several of his own shots very nicely, but at the same time, the output was very low. So his output didn't necessarily far and away impress any more so than Joshua's output in terms of actually judging who was more effective in there. They're about equally effective by and large in a lot of those rounds, until the later rounds where it seemed like Joshua started to really kind of take over the tempo of the fight more so. But was somewhat of a forgettable fight. It didn't unfortunately didn't live up to what you would imagine, unification, a heavyweight unification especially should be. But I think part of the blame is on Parker for the fact that he was fighting a lot more of like a spoilers type fight, and then part of the blame can go to Joshua as well by virtue of his, I think, being a little bit too I don't want to say trigger happy, but like almost like playing it so close to the chest and not firing off on the early goings, and then just kind of choosing volume over power in the later goings on. But honestly, to me, this fight, along with even the Wilder Ortiz fight, doesn't necessarily I think give us any further insight necessarily into how a Joshua versus Wilder fight would play out, other than the fact that we have seen Wilder against Ortiz get tired in spots and get hurt in spots, and we've seen Joshua get hurt and get tired in spots as well. We saw it against Klitschko. Ultimately, I do think that Joshua versus Wilder is going to wind up being it's going to play out in a similar manner to both of their recent fights, where I think the two of them are both going to be very, very much one shot at a time, and really just looking for that single bomb to kind of spark off a follow-up from there, and then potentially get a knockout or what have you. But the fight is still enticing. It's still an interesting fight. I don't know. Maybe it won't be kind of the absolute barn burner that a lot of people expect. It really all depends on the mentality of both guys going into it. It's hard to judge, but considering what they've both shown in the past, in actuality, what they've shown, I'd imagine that the first couple of rounds are going to be kind of tense with not too much action, and then from there it might start to pop off if either one of them starts to actually land cleanly, because then the other one's going to want to get some get back and counter punching, and then the counters will lead to further counters from the other guy, and so on and so forth. But that's pretty much how I saw Joshua versus Parker. Parker gave a very good account of himself, and ultimately I actually think that considering how well Parker did against Joshua, I actually think that it shows that the heavyweight division isn't necessarily this two-horse race that a lot of people kind of looked at it as going into the two fights that each guy had. I think Ortiz is still very much a live dog in there in the top 5 and the top 10 of heavyweights. Same for Parker, and you could even throw Andrew Ruiz in there. You can throw Hughie Fury in there. Tyson Fury as well. Considering however he decides to come back, whenever he decides to come back. As long as he's even in a modicum of the same shape that he was for Klitschko, or even for his rematch against Chisora, even I thought he looked good. Dillian White looked pretty impressive against Lucas Brown, albeit that was against Lucas Brown, a guy that I personally don't rate particularly highly, but at the very least, he's shown that even in the bottom half of the top 10, there's some danger that looms there, as well as Povetkin. Even though Price rocked him pretty nicely there a couple of times in the fight, he did manage to show that old power that he's always had, and get Price out of there. So even amongst your Povetkins, your Whites, and some maybe newer names on the scene like Jarrell Miller, there's definitely some interesting heavyweights to be had, some interesting matchups to be had, and whether Wilder versus Joshua takes place next, or possibly in the early goings of next year, I think whoever potentially wins that fight, barring any rematches or third fights or whatever happens with regards to that whole thing, I think there's plenty of good opposition for either or both of them to face, both beforehand and especially in the aftermath of that fight, considering some of the other guys that I mentioned. But that's pretty much how I saw it, Joshua versus Parker. I mean, definitely a good account for Parker. I think we come out of the fight saying that he was actually, a better fighter than he was given credit for, and maybe he's just one of those guys that kind of fights to the level of his opposition to a degree, and they're just the tempo of his fights. He'll fight up to a certain level. He's almost like that guy that he could ace all the tests and everything, but give him the homework and he just kind of is like, meh, whatever. Like, he doesn't do some of the assignments, and so he'll get a B in the class because he got C's and D's on the homework because he didn't give a damn, but he aced all the tests. That maybe that's the type of fighter that Joseph Parker is. As for Anthony Joshua, I think this ultimately is the anomaly in his career. Or generally speaking, he's been more of like a more of a flashy, hard hitting, hard punching type of fighter. And I think it's unfortunate for him that he fought two durable guys in a row between Parker and Takam in his last couple of fights. Going forward, I think guys that are really going for the gusto a lot more so may show that Parker shines against those type of guys more so than more defensive slash durable type of fighters like he's fought in his last couple of fights. But that's gonna do it for this one. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.